Hello friends. So in today's video, I would like to introduce you to this book. It's called Addicted to Energy Deficit, Your Neuroscience-Based Guide to Restrictive Eating Disorders. And it's by a lady called Helly. Now, this channel is all about me sharing from my lived experience. And a couple of times already, I've also within that shared a few books in videos that I have found really helpful. And in those videos, I talked a little bit about what I found helpful and also ran through some key things that I took away from those different books. And in today's video, I would like to do the same with this book by Helly because personally, I found it really informative and insightful, and I certainly resonated on a variety of levels with what she was sharing. So without further ado, I'm going to jump right in. So in short, in this book, Helly brings together neuroscience and research evidence, as well as her personal and professional experience, to provide an explanation for restrictive eating disorders as an addiction to energy deficit. Now, I feel that wherever you sit on your agreement or disagreement with that theory, I still feel that this book has a lot to offer in the context of recovery. And it's certainly eye-opening to look at the overlap between addictions in other areas and eating disorders, and to see the neuroscience and the evidence that does point in the direction of that. However, as I say, I think that wherever you may be on your thoughts towards that theory, actually there's a lot in this book that is really valuable from a practical recovery perspective. So I've got a few notes now that I'd like to share that were some of the key things I've taken away from this book. Firstly, I can see very much from Helly's explanation how this theory of eating disorders as an addiction to energy deficiency fits with other theories for eating disorders. For example, the genetic component. Addictions have a strong genetic component in the same way that eating disorders do. Also, the idea that eating disorders are triggered by an energy deficit or the onset of an energy deprived state. This also fits in the Helly states the onset of the energy deprived state is also the onset of the addictive state. And finally, the adapted to flee famine theory by Geisinger also lines up with this in that the evolutionary response creates brain changes in line with addiction to restrict and move. And that behavior is perceived to protect the body from harm. And so what Helly outlines is that this theory, the eating disorders are an addiction to energy deficiency, fits with other theories that are spoken about in this community, be that the genetic element, be that the concept that eating disorders are triggered by an energy deficiency, or Geisinger's adapted to flee famine work. Something that I really love about this book is that Helly really brings in the neuroscience, but she does it in a super approachable way. Now, the key things that I have written down and taking away from this is firstly understanding the key areas of the brain that play a role in addiction and this concept of an eating disorder as an addiction to energy deficiency. And these are the basal ganglia and the striatum, which play a role in the pursuit of goals and habit formation, and the prefrontal cortex, which is that executive function center, and it's responsible for judgments, decisions, and impulse control. And Helly states that two of the key ways in which the brain is affected by addiction is that there is a breakdown in communication between the striatum and the prefrontal cortex, and the brain's dopamine levels are destabilized. Now, Helly goes into a lot of detail on these things, but as I say, in a very approachable, friendly manner. And I found it really interesting to dig deeper into those topics, but I'm wanting to keep it quite superficial in this video because I want this to be very much just a general overview of bits of the book that I've taken away and found helpful. The key things I've taken away are that this leads to a shift in the brain's pattern for deep learning. So that habitual behavior formation from repetition, there's less or no prefrontal cortex involvement in that process in addiction. And that second point, the dopamine imbalance. The pursuit of dopamine releasing behaviors leads to a seesaw effect in someone with the genetic predisposition to an addiction. Now, this increases over time. The highs get higher, the lows get lower. And what that leads to is an increase over time of the lows, causing craving and withdrawal, driving repeated pursuit of the behavior. So, in the context of this specific setting, that is the cycle of when you take action away from energy deficiency, there is huge resistance neurologically to that, and a pull back in the direction of behaviors that align with energy deficiency. I think what's really interesting for me is viewing that itchy, scratchy, backlash, stormy place that we talk about a lot in recovery as a withdrawal from a compulsive or addictive behavior pattern, because it makes so much sense. I can see and resonate so much with the withdrawal state that you might associate with other areas of addiction, with that deep discomfort in recovery of having to sit when every fibre of your being wants to be doing and moving, of having to go and do those opposite actions and work through the acceptance of your recovering body and face head on all of those things which are so positive from a recovery perspective, but so deeply challenging whilst you are going through it. And I think viewing it through the lens of withdrawal is really interesting to me. I also relate very much to that idea that the prefrontal cortex is not involved or less involved in habit and behavior formation inside an addiction, or inside, as Helly's putting forward here, restrictive eating disorder. Because I know very much for myself that whilst on some level I knew that actually what I was doing inside my eating disorder wasn't what I wanted to do and wasn't leading me to a positive place, I felt this disconnect between that and then the reality, and certainly a disconnect between that and what I wanted to do in this moment. I also thought it was really interesting that Helly looked into what made the eating disorder behavior initially rewarding. Because at the end of the day, when we look at other examples of addictive behavior, often there is some level of reward or draw to the initial engagement in that behavior. And what Helly states is the thing that makes the eating disorder behaviors initially rewarding may be one or a combination of the following. One, that on some level or in some way, engaging in that behavior is directly rewarding to the person. Two, that engaging in that behavior in some way solves a problem. And the third one being that the brain perceives that behavior to be protecting the person from harm. And I think for me, what fits here very much is that acknowledgement that there's often a variety of things that can set the scene for the eating disorder. And absolutely, one of those things which fits with the migration theory and the adapt to flee famine theory, that if you have got that genetic predisposition to go into a migratory starvation mode when you are exposed to an energy deficiency, then your brain will perceive that behavior to be protecting you from harm. And so I thought this was just interesting how it pulled together different pieces. So at this point in the book, we then start to move on to the more practical aspect of what you do. You've got that awareness, and Helly puts it forward so brilliantly. The idea of the theory, the evidence, the neuroscience, all of that, and then moves on to something which I'm a big advocate for, which is the doing. And the first thing she dives into is recognizing, in the context of this theory of eating disorders as an addiction to energy deficiency, that one of the key things is about reprogramming the brain. And she talks about the two elements of this being rewiring, which is something that we commonly speak about on this channel, and The other part being allowing brain chemistry to return to normal. Now, in short, she states that this requires the relearning of new neural circuitry, and two, disengaging from the eating disorder, abstaining from eating disorder aligned behaviors in order to allow your brain to, yes, rewire, but also to reprogram from a brain chemistry perspective, to reset those dopamine levels. I'm getting closer and closer to this screen as the video goes on because I'm getting really enthusiastic about sharing with you, but I'm going to try and sit a little bit back. Now, as I say, this is the bit where in the book, Helly now dives headfirst into the practical, actionable stuff of recovery. And this is the bit that I feel, regardless of your thoughts or feelings towards that theory of eating disorders as an addiction to energy deficiency, I think there's a lot that can be taken from this book from a practical recovery sense. First of all, I love the fact that Helly uses this theory to reinforce why abstinence and total abstinence from disordered behaviors is so very often the thing that makes all the difference. Not only do people time and time again state that actually abstaining from behaviors is mentally easier, it also is a way to leapfrog to a place of more mental clarity. And from the addiction perspective, there's no eating disorder hits. And one, that means no traffic sent down the eating disorder neural network, but also in the context of this theory, it means there's no trickle of dopamine to kick fire and trigger that urge and that pull in the direction of the compulsive addictive behavior. Helly also puts forward the reasoning behind why taking it one day at a time is so valuable. That is something which is a common component of other addictive behavior treatment programs, the one day at a time concept. And actually, it's something that I know I found hugely beneficial. And when one day was too much, it was one morning, 1 hour, one now at a time. That was something I found really, really helpful. And I know, thanks to my contact with all sorts of people all over the world in their journeys, that is a shared experience, that breaking it down, that bringing it into this moment is a very powerful tool in recovery. And as I say, Helly's link here to the addictive theory makes a lot of sense of why that is so helpful in recovery. Helly also gives an amazing sort of in-depth exploration of reprogramming from her perspective, and the key bits that I've picked up are that in recovery there needs to be a deliberate pursuit of energy surplus. She frames it as eating as someone wanting to restore weight, someone who's on an anti-diet. There's no limits. There's a prioritization of the things that are energy dense and a theme of as much as you can. She talks about there needing to be an aim high baseline minimum and a commitment to be honouring all hunger above, beyond and around this. She also talks about the if in doubt, eat, and to get honest of, can I eat more? Then do. She also talks about the fact that whilst moderation approaches can be helpful, they should be viewed as a stepping stone or a tool rather than the thing that gets you the whole way. And I absolutely relate to this. I am somebody who is an advocate for that hop, skip, and a jump, that acknowledgement that, of course, the view is to jump. And there are certain commitments that you have to be bold in making in recovery. However, recovery is a multicolored process and everyone's journey is unique. And there are very many people who have successfully made use of various different tools and stepping stones to help them get on their way and towards that place where they are fully free. But that's the key thing. It's a stepping stone. And Helly very much puts forward that whilst moderation approaches can indeed be useful tools, actually it is that abstinence that is key to being able to make a full recovery. There are so many great bits of this book, but I'm very aware if I was to talk through all of them, one, I'd probably just read you the book, and two, we'd be here for a very long time. A couple more things that I want to share with you from it. One, I absolutely love the fact that Helly makes it very clear that the brain retains its ability for neuroplasticity throughout the lifespan. This is something that I know from my own studies. It's also something that was very much repeated to me on a conference that I went to last year all around neuroplasticity and rewiring the brain. And I just think that it's such an important thing to hold on to. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about the challenges that Helly explores that commonly occur along the recovery journey. And I am going to read this from my notes because otherwise I'll start talking and I'll just be here forever. So she talks about negative beliefs and negative self-talk that comes up in recovery, and very much poses that the solution there is to be challenging them head on and directly. She talks about social isolation and the challenges that that can involve. And she is an advocate for reaching out and connecting to people and leaning into community and connection and those around you wherever you can in recovery. She talks about the return of emotions and how challenging and overwhelming that can be. And she says about practicing compassion, about allowing yourself to feel them, leaning into support and creating yourself a coping, self-soothing toolkit to support yourself through that process. She talks about fear and how fear shows up as a challenging component of the recovery journey. And she says about identifying it, owning your power, feeling the fear and doing it anyway, and staying in the now, that powerful thing of one day at a time again. And finally, she talks about those urges to be busy and doing, and that's something I relate to a lot in terms of my own journey. And she puts forward things that very much reflect what I found to be helpful, which is taking time out, setting boundaries, and prioritizing rest above everything. And finally, Helly talks a lot about the importance of self-empowerment in recovery, and this is something that I resonate with so much. Far too often in standard approaches to treatment, there is a disempowerment of individuals, and this is not helpful in the context of recovery. I've done a variety of videos on this channel talking about owning your power, tapping into your core self's wisdom, stepping into the knowing that you have already within you, and acknowledging the fact that you have everything you need to do this journey within you already, here and now, today. I talk a lot about that, and I think self-empowerment as a concept and a topic is so important in recovery. And she couples this with another thing that I'm incredibly passionate about, as you'll know, which is rebuilding self-identity. That's that self-discovery work, that self-exploration, that reconnecting with who you are at your core, the person you want to be, the life that you want to live, and who you are separate from and free from your eating disorder. So, on that note, I'm going to wrap it up here. I hope that this has been helpful. If there's anything that's particularly stood out to you from what I've shared from my reading of this book, please do let me know in the comments below. I share on this channel from a lived experience perspective. So as always, please do take what helps and leave the rest. And if you are interested in finding out a little bit more about Helly and her work and this book, then I will leave a link in the description to her website where you'll be able to find out all of those things. For now though, wherever you are, whatever you are doing, I hope that you have a wonderful day, and I look forward to speaking to you in the next one. Bye.